up, YouTube?
Today we're working on our 1967 Airstream Ambassador.
And we're going to be installing a brand new belly pan with some new subfloor insulation. So to make this process a lot easier, we're going to pick the whole trailer up and spin it 180 degrees so that we can work facing down and not lying on our backs. After that, we'll go through the process of what we chose for insulation and what we chose for the brand new belly pan material and how we're going to go about installing everything. Alright, so now that the trailer is flipped over and sitting on some sawhorses, we're going to begin going through the insulation and belly pan process. So starting at the back of the trailer, because when you're going down the road, you want all of the road grime and water to be kicked up onto this belly pan, and the way they're overlapped for it to wash off onto the next belly pan and not be forced to peel apart in between the two. So you start at the back, you work your way forward, and you won't have an issue when you're driving down a wet road with the water being pushed up inside of the belly pan. So what we're going to do, we have a 5-inch gap in between the subfloor and where the belly pan is going to be. So what I chose to do is I have a 3-inch thick foam board and a 2-inch thick. So that's going to completely fill that 5-inch void. And back here, the 67 Ambassador had a small open compartment in the back for the black water drainage pipe coming out. I don't want to take the belly pan all the way to the end here because that would leave it completely accessible from the elements once it's turned right side up. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back to this piece of angle iron here, which is the last piece of support on the subfloor, and the belly pan is going to come down and join to that so that when the trailer is flipped over, it stops with the subfloor. And then for the insulation back here, we're going to put this angle iron is 2 inches by 2 inches. So we're going to put a 2-inch piece of foam block as the base layer, and then I think I'm going to do half of a layer of the 3-inch thick so that when the belly pan comes over and curves down, it will be completely sandwiched in here. It'll have a small void here, but nothing that can float around. Alright, now that we have the first pieces of insulation cut, I'm going to go through what I'm going to use to kind of seal it down and then fill all the other gaps. So I'm sure all of you guys have heard of expanding foam, the great stuff. So you can use this in typical cans that have the tube on them, but since we're going to be doing so much, I purchased their Pro Series gun, and then we have a couple different attachments for it. To start, we have construction adhesive, which is for subfloors and foam block and stuff like that. So I'm going to use that to kind of glue the blocks to the subfloor, and then the 3-inch block to the 2-inch block. And then we have two different sizes of expanding foam. We have windows and doors and big gaps and cracks, and that's up for up to 3 inches. The reason I got both is because the big stuff is actually pretty strong. They actually made the window and door version of it because the big stuff was cracking windows because it would expand so violently. So I got both of those, and then in order to save this gun for the next use, I got a couple cans of gun cleaner. So that's that. I purchased these shears for the aluminum once we start laying the belly pan out and cutting that. I purchased a new rivet gun because I just had the typical hand style. I thought this would be a little bit easier to do, a couple hundred rivets. Rivets, of course, that I purchased off of Air Parts Inc. in Kansas. These are just your normal pop rivet, but I do have a larger flange since you're holding thin sheet metal. These will help give it a bit more surface area to grip to. An assortment of Klinkos. This just helps when you're laying out the belly pan. You can temporarily hold it into place without actually putting a rivet into it yet. And then we have butyl tape. And this butyl tape I'm going to use to seal the actual frame rail to the belly pan material. So it's going to be left unsealed when the two pieces of aluminum meet each other. But as far as the long gaps going all the way down the frame rails, I'm going to use this beautiful sealant tape, which is for like aluminum flashing on a house. And that's just going to keep it from vibrating around and moving around and give it somewhat of a seal. Alright, so now we're going to get started with the front of the trailer, gluing all the foam block down. So what I have is my Great Stuff construction adhesive and the gun to dispense it. I have a small DeWalt battery blower just to clean the surface off before I apply it. And then this stuff says it adheres in about 10 minutes. So I have a couple of batteries I'm just going to place on the foam to kind of put some pressure on it while it adheres, and then go down the line and move the batteries down. So first things first, I'm going to remove all of the pieces of foam. There's the 3-inch block. And the 2-inch block. So we'll go ahead and clean this surface off. Alright, with all that cleaned off, I'm going to crack open this can and install it onto the gun. With all that laid down, I'm going to go ahead and put a coating of the construction adhesive on the 2-inch block, and then we'll glue the 3-inch block onto that. Alright, with all that in place, I'm going to take the batteries, put them into the center. The most important part is we want to make sure we're very close to being flush with the cross members, because when you rivet the belly pan to them, you don't want to have that thin aluminum really stressed out. So I'll put that closer to there. Alright, so now with all the foam actually glued down, I'm going to go and fill up all this cracks like this with the window and door expanding foam. Same gun, I ran some cleaner through it, and then just real quick I'm going to fill them up. Alright, so now that we gave the foam about an hour to fully cure, I'm going to use a combination of this little saw and just a normal box cutter. And we're gonna go around and trim off all the excess stuff so that it doesn't interfere with the belly pan. Alright, so now that the insulation is all glued down, the gaps are filled with expanding foam, and it's all been trimmed down to be flush with the rails, as you can see. I'm going to start the belly pan installation process starting with the rear of the trailer. So we are at 58 inches from frame rail to frame rail, so that's how wide the aluminum needs to be. So we're going to be cutting it long ways and riveting it down the middle. So typically you're going to go 4 foot, which is going to be 2 frame rails. If I measure from that frame rail, I got 4 foot right here. But like I said, we're going to roll over and rivet under this panel, under this angle iron. So because of that, 4 foot won't have enough. So this first one is going to be a little over 2 foot. So to start, what we need to do is cut a piece 58 inches wide, or 58 inches long, and the roll that I bought is 48 inches wide. So after we cut it at 58, we can trim it down to our just a little over 24 inches. Alright, so we're set up on the workbench now. We're going to lay out a piece of this aluminum and cut it at 58 inches. When you're cutting the tape that's holding the roll together, it's a real good idea to have a strap on it because this stuff will kind of blow up real quick. I got the tape tight, or the tape cut, and I can just let this out a little bit. Alright, so now that I got it laid out, I can measure out 58 inches and I have a scribe to mark it at 58. Now with our straight edge, we can line this up. Alright, and with that scribe, I'm now going to scoot this down a little bit so I can have more access to cut it. Now with our shears, I'm going to just follow that line I just scribed and chop this part off. Alright, so with the 58 inches now cut, if you remember, I'm going to stop this one just over 2 foot because it's only going to go to the first cross member. So I'm going to go measure out exactly how far I need to go from the cross member to the end of the trailer and curl over to that angle beam. Alright, so it looks like 2 foot and 3 inches is exactly what I need. With 2 foot and 3 inches scribed out, I can go ahead and cut that part off. All right, so now with our 2 foot and 3 inches, we're gonna have to make a few more cuts because when it rolls into the frame rail to connect to that angle iron, it does get about 4 inches narrower. So I'm gonna go measure that. Alright, as you can see, we just barely fit inside the frame rail there, and same thing on this side. The only thing left holding it back is this other support that comes in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark that with a Sharpie and then cut it with a cutoff wheel, because a cutoff wheel will be almost the exact same thickness as that piece of angle, and then that will be able to fish right over that angle and we'll be able to rivet in place on the bottom. Alright, so I cut a few pieces of wood to help me hold the aluminum in place while I drill. So now I go ahead and drill a couple holes to install some Klinkos to hold the aluminum in place while I fit the rest of it. Alright, so now that I got this piece roughly laid out, you can see it can still go down a little bit here, but I will do that with the final installment. So I'm going to remove it, and what we're going to do is we're going to install butyl tape along this seam, and then along this backing seam on the angle iron. This one's going to be left open for the entire trailer because if water does leak into the subfloor from inside, we do want it to have a way to get out, so we're going to leave those open. Alright, with everything laid back out with my butyl tape, I can go ahead and start riveting in. A little trick I'm going to do is putting the rivet in just a little bit of red and tacky grease. And what that's going to do is just surround that hole that we just drilled into the frame that's bare metal with some grease, and that will help fight rust in the future. Okay, so the rear piece of belly pan is now fully installed. I haven't riveted this section here because I'm going to rivet that while it's overlapping the next section. So I'm going to cut another 58-inch piece to span between these two frames, and this one will go all the way up to the holding tank, and then we're going to jump to the other side of that. Alright, with the second panel fully Klinkoed into place, I'm going to go ahead and pull it off, install the butyl tape on the frame rail sides, and then we can flip it back over and fully rivet it. Alright, so as you can see, the back two panels are completely permanently installed. For the tank, you can see I stopped just before it, and we're going to pick back up right on this cross beam. And what I plan to do, as you can see, there's nothing riveted here. I'm not going to rivet anything on here because I'm going to weld a sealed tub that is going to be removable for the tank. So after the belly pan's finished, the tub will be installed on here and riveted, sandwiching the belly pan. So it'll go over top of this one, and then it'll go underneath this one, just like we're doing with the belly pan. So we'll switch to a time lapse. Alright, real quick guys, I wanted to give an update about where I was. We're on to the last two pieces and they're gonna get a little bit different here. We have just over 5 feet left, and these pieces are 4 foot sections. So what I'm gonna do is have the next piece only go about 2 feet. It'll go to right here, and then we'll have the last section that'll be just over 3 feet, continue all the way to the front. Alright, so starting with the front, and then going down the line, all of the panels overlap, pointing towards the back so water can't get inside. In between the axles, I put a rivet every 6 inches, and then just on the typical frame, I put a rivet every foot, and that's because when you put the shell on, the shell will come and overlap here, so it'll get another rivet every 6 inches. Alright, so as you guys can see, I have finished installing the belly pan on my 1967 Ambassador. Overall, it wasn't a super difficult process, but it was pretty time consuming, especially because it was my first time doing a belly pan. So I wanted to double check everything, think through everything before I cut it, and really make sure I dot all my I's and cross all my T's. With this being my first belly pan install, if a seasoned professional has anything they could add, or something that I did wrong or I could improve, I'd really appreciate hearing it in the comments. I'm always eager to learn something new. But other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you guys learned something. Thanks for watching.